I just want to greet all of us this morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming back and joining us again for for our last day about our conference and our seminars on biblical textual criticism. I hope we enjoy and we learn a lot from our speakers yesterday about textual criticism of Old Testament, New Testament, and also Dead Sea Scroll. And today we're gonna have another four speakers, main speakers. And the first one, okay, please let me know if Dr. Gentry is ready here. Please let me know. So I will, because he told me that I think he will be here in a few minutes. He will be joining us in a few minutes. Please let me know when he's here. So basically, I would like to introduce Dr. Peter Gentry as our first speaker. Actually, like, he is my supervisor. He is my PhD supervisor at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And I was so lucky I could study under him. And I learned a lot from him about biblical textual criticism, especially in Old Testament, and also about Semitic languages, about Septuagint, about Greek, and many things about biblical studies. I learned a lot from him, and I would like to introduce him, our first speaker. Our first speaker. I would like to read his CV. Yeah. Okay. Dr. Peter Gentry, he got his PhD from University of Toronto, and his major is on LXX, LXX, and his supervisor is John Weavers. John Weaver is like one of the famous Septuagint studies in the world, and then his students, lots of his students, continue his path by doing textual criticism on Septuagint. Uh, Actually, I I was planning, and also like I already invited one of his students, that Professor John Weavers. His name is Cox, Dr. Cox, and he's the expert in Armenian studies. Oh, thank you. Praise the Lord. We have like Dr. Peter Gentry here already. Join us. Thank you. And also, but sadly, Dr. Cox cannot join us for this year. Hopefully, we're gonna invite him again next year. And this is Dr. Peter Gentry. Uh, he got PhD from University of Toronto with Septuagint and Hellenistic Greek as his major. And also, he has so many teaching experience. I will not read one by one because so many, and also like he has written so many publications, maybe around like 100 publications. And he is a director of Hexapla Institute, and he joins at SBL and also International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies. And he is married to Barbara Gentry in 1979. And he has like two children, Stewart and Laura. And I do not know how many grandkids do you have right now, Dr. Gentry. Once again, oh, three. Okay, once again, yeah. This is an honor, Dr. Gentry, for me to see you again. This is an honor for me to introduce you, to introduce your scholarships, your expertise, your field, your work, and also your desire for Christ. Once again, this is an honor for me, and also like it is an honor for all of us. We can learn together from you, and we have like some audience, not only from Indonesia, but we have like some audience from Malaysia as well. So we have like audience from some countries, different countries. So once again, we are pleased and we are delighted that you could join us and you could bless us. And once again, thank you, Dr. Gentry, and the time is yours. Maybe you can unmute first, Dr. Gentry. Unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, I don't, all right. I hope you can see me all right. I turned off the bright lights. Well, it's an honor for me to spend this time with you. And I've always wanted to know the future, and now I'm speaking 12 hours into the future. Okay, so can I share my screen then?
Yes, you can share your screen.
Okay, so let's see how this works. Uh, how do I from the beginning there? So can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The history of the Old Testament, of the writing of the Old Testament text. Let's see, this thing is at the top. Can you see the top, or is it is it can you read the writing at the top, or is that thing is the here, maybe I can put this down at the bottom. There we go. That'll work. Okay, good. How do I get it to go to the next slide? Just a second here. How do I get it to go to the next slide? There we go. History of the writing. All right. Canon and text are closely related. For those who believe in divine revelation, mediated by authorized agents, the central questions are which writings come from these agents authorized to speak for God? And two, have their writings been reliably transmitted to us? Although my presentation is focused on the second question, the former is logically prior. How one answers the first question will determine evaluation of evidence relating to the second. So, which writings and have they been preserved reliably? According to Nahum Sarna, what defines a canonical text is, quote, a fixed arrangement of content, end quote, and quote, the tendency to produce a standardized text, end quote. Since the very first biblical text constituted a covenant, this automatically implies a fixed arrangement of content and a standard text. So the Sinai covenant was the very first biblical text, and since this was a covenant, it automatically means a fixed arrangement of content and a standard text. So the Sinai covenant is a marriage between Yahweh and Israel. A marriage contract does not have a long oral prehistory. Its content is fixed from the start. The current view among scholars today is that the content and text of the Old Testament was not standard until the 2nd century AD. This means that Jesus could not really know for sure what writings were inspired by God, nor did he have a standard text, a stabilized text. And this is what I am calling chaos theory. Analysis of the evidence has led me to conclude that the text of the Old Testament in content, arrangement, and stability was fixed, probably at the beginning of the 4th century BC by Ezra and Nehemiah. And it is the history of this text that I attempt to treat in my presentation. First, we begin with understanding the history of the text. The authors of the text of the Old Testament produced their work between the 15th and 4th centuries BC. How can we know that the final form of the text, regarded as canonical by the 2nd century BC, has been transmitted to us in a reliable and trustworthy manner? To answer this question, the answer to this question can be provided in two ways. First, by describing the sources that have survived, whether they are copies of the originals in Hebrew or Aramaic, or whether they are ancient translations or versions. So we have to describe the sources that have survived. And secondly, by understanding the history of the transmission of the text. The word understanding here is all important because the data are not self-interpreting. I'm going to begin with a brief sketch of the stages in Hebrew writing. As we all know, before the invention of the printing press in 1450, all books were copied by hand. Producing books was painstaking and slow work. We call books created in this way manuscripts, a term coming from two Latin words, scriptus, written, and manu, by hand. A book written by hand. All right, there are actually three stages of Hebrew writing. In the first stage of Hebrew writing, only consonants were used to represent the language in the earliest stages of writing. This is actually a reliable way of writing since context determines readings that are uncertain. Israeli newspapers today still use only consonants. Correct pronunciation of the biblical text, moreover, was passed down orally from priest to priest and from scribe to scribe. The second stage, beginning somewhere in the 9th century BC, the letters Hey, Wow, and Yod, and later also sometimes Aleph, were given a double function to represent not only consonants but also long vowels as well. This system, however, was not consistent or systematic, and moreover, did not represent all the vowels. Thirdly, during the period from 700 to 1000 AD, Jewish scholars called Masoretes developed a system of dots and squiggles to go over and under the letters. The dots represented all the vowels and also the accents. Early Hebrew writing employed a script. All right. Early Hebrew writing employed a script similar to that used by the ancient Phoenicians. Later, under the influence of the Chaldean kings of Babylon, scribes switched from the old Hebrew script to using the Aramaic square script. So here's Genesis 1:1 in the old Canaanite, in the old Hebrew script, the Paleo Hebrew script that is like the Phoenicians. Here's Genesis 1:1 in the Aramaic square script. And here is Genesis 1:1 using not only the square script, but also the dots in over the letters, in the letters, and under the letters that represent the vowels and the accents. This actually is a picture of of Hezekiah's the inscription that Hezekiah made when he made the tunnel to go from the Gihon spring inside the city wall to the pool of Siloam. The tunnel is over 550 meters long, and at the end of it there was this inscription, and you can see here the kind of letters that were used in Hezekiah's time. And if you look carefully, I've put a circle. The words are separated by dots, and this is important to avoid confusion. For example, if we had a text without any spaces, would that mean God is nowhere, or God is now here? So sometimes you can make mistakes if there isn't proper spacing. This is an example of what a sentence would look like in English with no vowels. This is the background slide on the consonantal text, and you can see that some words are obvious, like background and consonantal and text. A word like this, THS, could be this or these or those or thus, but all words always occur in sentences, and once they occur in a sentence, there's really only there's only one possibility for reading it. This is an example of I'll show. This is a scroll from Qumran, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, written in the old Hebrew script. Here, we'll skip this. This shows how papyrus is made. This shows wax tablets and how codices were made, and the history of the Hebrew Bible. When the Masoretes invented the dots to show the vowels, there were actually the Masoretes devised a system of signs to represent the vowels and committed the reading tradition handed down orally to writing. At the beginning, as we saw, only a few vowels were shown. Later, full vocalization was shown under the influence of Syriac and Arabic literature. Secondly, they also developed a set of diacritical signs to mark the accents according to the chanting of the text in the synagogue. The history of the Masoretes correlates with different groups of Jewish scholars. First, a large-scale emigration to Babylon occurred in the 2nd century AD after the Third Jewish Revolt from 132 to 136 AD. Later, conquest of Palestine by Islam in 638 AD made it possible for the Jews to return to Palestine, Iberia, or Galilee. As a result, there were different systems of vocalization. Tiberian was under the line, Palestinian was above the line, and Babylonian was above the line. And then there's one manuscript that mixes Tiberian and Palestinian. So I'll show you that. Here is the Tiberian system. The dots are under the letters. Here is the Palestinian system. The dots are over the letters, supralinear. And the same thing is in the Babylonian system. And this is a picture of Codex Reuchlin from 1105 AD, which combines the Tiberian and Palestinian systems and is what we would call an expanded system. There were also two famous families of Masoretes, the family of Ben Asher and the family of Ben Naphtali. The text of the Ben Asher family is universally accepted as the most faithful preservation of the text. These medieval Masoretic manuscripts are accurate witnesses to an ancient consonantal text of the highest quality. I won't go over, this is a list of the most important Masoretic manuscripts before 1100. The most important is, of course, the Aleppo Codex, which it used to include the whole Old Testament, but when Israel became a nation in 1948, there were riots against the Jews in Syria, and the synagogue was set on fire, and the Pentateuch portion was lost. So today it only has the prophets and the writings. The Leningrad Codex is complete, and these other manuscripts have either the prophets or the Torah or the writings. As many as 3,000 manuscripts are known from the Middle Ages. All of them attest to the same textual tradition with only minor variations. The medieval manuscripts were studied by Benjamin Kennicott and De Rossi, who published their editions in the 18th century. Now we're going to look at the evidence for the text before the Masoretes. Before 1900, we had no Hebrew manuscripts prior to the Masoretic manuscripts around 1000 AD. Two discoveries changed all this, and we are just beginning to evaluate the new materials. So we have two major discoveries: the text from the Judean desert and the texts from the Cairo Geniza. So I don't know what the rules are in Indonesia, but in the United States, if a flag is worn out, you can't just put it in the garbage or the trash. There's a proper way to dispose of a flag, and in the synagogue, when a scroll was worn out, there was a proper way to dispose. There was a proper way to dispose of the scroll. They had a room at the back of the synagogue called a geniza. Ganaz means to store away, and this is where they would store the worn out scrolls. Well, basically at the end of the 1800s, they found in the old synagogue, in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Old Cairo, they found all these ancient texts that were before 1000, that many of which were before 1000 AD. This shows you a map of where many of the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. So from the Wadi El Daliyah, from Qumran, from the Wadi Miraba'at, from Nachal Chever, from Nachal Se'alim, and from Masada. I won't go. This shows you about fragments of about 900 books were found at Qumran, and about 200 of these were books of the Bible. So and this shows you how many fragments we have of each book. These are we have from the Cairo Geniza and other places 7 or 8 manuscripts that come from the 3rd to the 7th centuries. So these are very early manuscripts. They're before the Masoretic period, and they're very important. These witnesses cast enormous light on the early history of the Masoretic text. All of these texts are basically identical to our later Masoretic text. Here's a picture of a fragment, one of these fragments, and here's a picture of the Ashkar Gilson Torah from the 7th century AD. So these are very early manuscripts. All right, I want to talk I won't spend very much time on it, but I want to talk about ancient versions of the Old Testament. The Samaritan Pentateuch. When the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, they deported the Israelites and imported other peoples who married with the people of Israel and became the Samaritans. Good relations between Jews and Samaritans were up and down until 128 BC, when John Hyrcanus attacked Shechem, and the breach between the Samaritans and the Jews were final. So from from 700 BC down to 128 BC, there were sometimes good relations and sometimes bad relations. But after 128 BC, there were always bad relations between the Jews and the Samaritans. And you see that in the New Testament. Only the Pentateuch is recognized among the Samaritans. The Samaritan Pentateuch, therefore, is a version of the Hebrew text of the Torah transmitted among the Samaritans in isolation from the Jews from the 2nd century BC onwards. It was later translated into Aramaic and to Arabic, and they used the old archaic Hebrew script. They never switched to the Aramaic square script, not only for the Hebrew, but also for the Aramaic and for the Targum, for the Arabic. Now, this pre-Samaritan text was adapted to suit the theology of the Samaritans. If we compare, here's the important point. If we compare the Samaritan Pentateuch with the later Masoretic text, what we find is that the form of the Masoretic text is more archaic. It's older. The grammar is older. The vocabulary is older. The syntax is older. And what we see in the Samaritan Pentateuch is grammatical modernizing of lexicography, lexical items, modernizing vocabulary, modernizing geographical names, exegetical and historical difficulties have been removed, and parallel texts are harmonized. So the Samaritan Pentateuch is very important because it shows that already by the 2nd century BC, what was transmitted as the Masoretic text was already being modernized in terms of grammar and spelling. So the Samaritan Pentateuch shows that the antiquity of what we have in the Masoretic text. The Septuagint. The old Greek or Septuagint refers to a translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The Pentateuch was translated in the time of Ptolemy II in Alexandria, Egypt. The prologue to Greek Ben Sira shows us that the rest of the books were translated by 130 BC. The name Septuaginta means 70 and is adapted from a piece of propaganda that the Torah was translated by 72 translators or scholars from Palestine. The individual books vary in character and quality of translation. Some of them are very literal, some of them are very dynamic. To complicate matters, long before all the books had been translated, they were being revised and brought into closer alignment to the Hebrew text. We already have, for example, the Greek Minor Prophet Scroll from Nahal Hever, which is from 50 BC. So, and we have Theodotion and Aquila and Symmachus. So these are Jewish revisions of the original Greek translation. There are two Latin versions. The first one is what we call the Old Latin, and it's a translation of the Septuagint. Not much of the Old Latin has survived. And then we have the translation made by Jerome between 391 and 405 AD. It's called the Latin Vulgate. And he translated the entire Old Testament directly from Hebrew into Latin. The oldest manuscript of the Latin Vulgate is Codex Amiatinus, which is from it was done between 610 and between 690 and 718 AD. It was made. Look at this book. It's over a foot thick. It's a third of a meter thick, and it was made out of 515 calf skins. There's a picture of Ezra copying the Bible. The Syriac Peshitta is a translation of the Hebrew Bible directly into Syriac, done in the 2nd century AD. So it's a very old translation. It's older than the Aramaic Targums. Some books are influenced by the Septuagint. We will talk about the Aramaic Targums later. So now let us turn our attention to the character of our earliest witnesses. What are the earliest witnesses? What are our earliest witnesses to the text like? Discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls has highlighted the fact that before the 2nd century AD, differences are attested between our earliest preserved copies of the text, as well as between the parent texts of the earliest translations. So when we look at our earliest sources, what we see is many differences. Differences between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text, differences between the parent text of the Septuagint and the parent text of some of our other translations. What are these? The question is, what are these differences like? What are these differences like? And what do they tell us about the history of the transmission of the text? We can classify our earliest witnesses according to 2 types. Number 1, manuscripts or translations that represent a simple, straightforward copying and transmitting of the text exactly and precisely as received. So we'll call these conservative texts. And then manuscripts and translations that represent scribes revising and updating the text to make it relevant and understood to the current circumstances or generation. James Sanders calls the first the repetition factor, and he calls the second, the facilitating texts, the resignification factor. Such a classification is extremely helpful in evaluating the apparent chaos in the witness.
Maybe we can wait a little bit. I believe Dr. Gentry has internet connection problem.
Am I back online?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's see. Let's go back to where I was here, sharing the screen. Here we are. Share. I hope this will work. My thing isn't working here. Just let me see if I can get it working. So here, show from the current slide. Okay, let's see if I can get this to work properly. I'm sorry about the internet problems. I don't see why it's there it's going. There we go. The evidence from the period demonstrates a general distinction between 2 scribal models. defined by the effort either to produce an exact copy or to produce a copy which facilitates understanding. The primary goal being the readability or comprehension of meaning, a goal which allows a certain freedom to the copyist. A spectrum of manuscripts produced by both models coexisted in Palestine in the late Second Temple period. Both were in widespread use, demonstrated on the one hand by the broad attestation of exact or conservative manuscripts among the discoveries at various sites in the Judean desert, including Qumran, and on the other hand by the facilitating texts represented by the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Septuagint, and other scriptural manuscripts and citations within the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the forelagen or parent texts of several rewritten Bible compositions, by various New Testament attestations, as well as by a variety of echoes in the rabbinic tradition. Let us take time to grasp and illustrate both of these approaches or scribal models. So one of my students, Andrew Case, he composes hymns and songs, Christian hymns and songs. Sometimes the hymns and songs have exactly the words of Scripture. They have the words of Scripture exactly. Sometimes they paraphrase the words of Scripture. Sometimes there are only allusions to the storyline of Scripture. Sometimes there is a combination of exact quotation and paraphrase. What would happen if someone was listening to these songs 1,000 years from now and would conclude that somehow there were a variety of biblical texts floating around? And this would be absolutely the wrong conclusion. Let us take let us take an example of a conservative or repetition approach which copies the parent text exactly and precisely in every way. The Masada Psalm scroll from the last third of the 1st century BC. The Masada Psalm scroll has a precise format and layout. As we all know, the book of Psalms is written in poetry, and Hebrew poetry is based on couplets of parallel lines. Each column of this scroll has approximately 29 to 30 lines, and one couplet is placed on each line with an appropriate space between the parallel lines of the couplet. So you can actually see in the center of this diagram, you can see one column of the scroll, and you can see at the top the heading for the psalm, and you can see a space between each half of the couplet. Only about 10 of the manuscripts from the Judean desert are carefully laid out in this way. Here's a close-up. Here's a close-up of the Masada Psalm. You can see it says Mizmor LaAsaph, and here is Psalm 82, where God sits in the assembly. He judges in the assembly of the gods. Another manuscript which is like this is 4Q Psalms B, although this one only has 16 to 17 lines per column, and instead of having one couplet per column, it has only a half a couplet per column. But it still uses spaces to separate, the lines of poetry. The format and text of 4Q Psalms B are not as close to the later Masoretic text as the Masada Psalms. So the Masada Psalms the Masada Psalms manuscript is basically identical. I think there are only 6 letters. There are only 6 letters that are different between it and the later Masoretic text. So the text was copied absolutely identical for 1,000 years. We can compare the Masada Psalms manuscript with both earlier and later traditions. So there's another look at 4Q Psalms B. So first of all, we can compare it. If we compare the Masada Psalms manuscript with Codex Sinaiticus, they lay out the lines of poetry are laid out exactly the same way. What we call the stichometry or the stichography, the way each verse is separated. Each verse contains a couplet. Each verse contains 2 lines of poetry, the A line and the B line. And Codex Sinaiticus agrees with the Masada Psalm scroll almost in 95% of the time. Also, Codex Vaticanus agrees with the layout in the Masada Psalms manuscript. What this shows us is that the way the lines of poetry were set out in couplets goes back to a much older tradition, at least to the 3rd century BC. Now, if we compare the Masada Psalm scroll with the later Masoretic codices, if we compare it with the Aleppo Codex of 930 AD and the Leningrad Codex of 1008 AD, there is some change because the Masoretic codices don't use spaces. They don't use spaces between the couplets in the poetic lines. But what they do is by marking the pausal forms and by using accents, they show exactly the same division of the lines of poetry. So in changing from scrolls to codices, they didn't use spaces. They didn't follow exactly the same layout, but they used the accents and pausal forms to mark exactly the same division of the lines of poetry. We see the same sort of thing in our Bibles today. So, for example, here is Psalm 4 in the 1611 edition of the King James Bible. And if you look at this, most people in North America most people in North America cannot read this. So, for example, verse 2, O ye sons of men, how long will ye turn my glory into shame? You can see that the letters are very different. They use a symbol that looks like an F instead of an S, and there are many differences in grammar and spelling. Notice this is the same King. This is the King James version, which was revised in the middle of the 1800s. So this is the King James version from about 1870. O ye sons of men, how long ye will turn my glory into shame? How long you will love vanity and seek after leasing? What is leasing? Well, it turns out that leasing is an old-fashioned English word for lying, for falsehood, and has nothing to do with renting a house or car. So what happens is in the New King James Version, they, instead of using the word leasing, they translate it as falsehood. So what we see is that over time, that They are modernizing the text. They are updating the text. They are changing the shape of the letters. They are changing the grammar. They are changing the vocabulary, and they are helping people to understand the text. So this is an example of facilitating. Here's the New King James Version of 1982. How long will you love worthlessness and seek falsehood? We see the same thing with Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Uh, so Cha um, Cha Canterbury Tales was written by Geoffrey Chaucer between 1387 and 1400. The current text is based on 84 manuscripts and 4 incunabula, early books printed before the printing press, before 1540. 55 of these manuscripts are thought to have been complete. 28 are extremely fragmentary. There are many variants due to copyist errors in some cases. In others, they are due to revisions by Chaucer himself. Here is a quote from the Merchant's Prologue. And as we look at this, if you're a native speaker of English, you can hardly understand what this text is about. If it was published today, it would look like this: weeping and wailing, care and other sorrow, I know enough. In the evening and in the morning, said the merchant, and so do many others who have been married. So what we see is that there is even in English, when we publish texts, there is the old texts are being modernized, they're being updated. We're updating the grammar, we're updating the vocabulary, we're updating the syntax. So these are examples, and just think about this. If English speakers cannot read an English text that's 500 years old, what do you think they were doing in the 2nd century BC when they had a text that was already 1,000 years old? A minimal type of updating involved changing the script from the Phoenician style used in the time of Hezekiah to the Aramaic square script beginning to be used in the 5th century BC. At some point, a scribe said to himself, if I don't change the Bible from the script I learned in school to the script my children are using in school, my children won't be able to read the Bible. About a dozen or so of the scrolls from the Judean desert are actually in the old style script, and most of them scrolls of the Torah. While many differences are due to either copying mistakes or due to revision and updating in re-signifying the text, some types of facilitating or re-signifying were more radical. So Sidney White Crawford in 2008 wrote a book called Rewriting Scripture in Second Temple Times, and she describes texts at Qumran on a continuous spectrum from biblical texts of the Pentateuch in the pre-Samaritan tradition to a text that is called the reworked Pentateuch, to the Book of Jubilees, to the Temple Scroll, the Genesis Apocryphon, and finally to 4Q commentary on Genesis A. This spectrum moves from conflation to harmonization and modification to expansion to new compositions closely related to the source, and then to commentaries that involve citing the text plus comment. She concludes that both canon and text were fluid and not standardized at this time. What is helpful is that her study shows the graduated continuum from the biblical text to paraphrase to commentary. Her conclusions, however, do not follow from analysis of the evidence. The evidence from Qumran must be put within the larger picture of all the scrolls from the Judean desert. The evidence of one sect within the widely variegated Judaism of the Second Temple. So the texts from Qumran only come from one particular sect, and we have to put that into the larger picture. The fact that most of the texts described by Crawford employ as a base a modernized text similar to that in the pre-Samaritan tradition is revealing. She is describing the path of resignification at this time, but this is only part of the larger picture. This is no different from a Christian or Jewish bookstore today. So in 2008, I went into the bookstore at Southern Seminary and I wrote down the names of all the Bibles. We have the Life Application Bible, Salty Kids Bible, the NIV Young Discoverers Bible, the Full Life Study Bible, the Woman's Devotional Bible, the Family Worship Bible, the Dramatized Bible, the Discovery Bible, the Message, the Daily Bible, the One Year Bible, the Orthodox Study Bible, the Precious Moments the Precious Moments Bible for expectant mothers. So what we need to do when we look at these different Bibles, do we conclude that the text is fluid and unstable? No. What we need to realize is the function of texts. Different texts perform different functions. Scholars have not paid sufficient attention to the function of these texts. There are many reasons why a person might modernize or re-signifies the biblical text. An example is 4Q Deuteronomy N. This is an excerpted and harmonized text. Excerpted means passages have been taken out of the Bible and put together in a different way for another purpose. This manuscript has the text of the Ten Commandments. Now, as you may know, the text of the Ten Commandments is slightly different in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. In particular, the reason for the Sabbath differs in these two texts. The reason in Exodus 20 is that God created the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh. The reason in Deuteronomy 5, however, is that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt and God gave them rest from slavery, so they should give rest to their slaves as well. In 4Q Deuteronomy N, the person who extracted this text to teach the Ten Commandments harmonized the text and used Deuteronomy 8 as a historical introduction to his Bible study pamphlet. So here's Deuteronomy 5:12 in the Masoretic text. Here's Deuteronomy, here's the same commandment in Exodus, and in 4Q Deuteronomy N, he's combined both reasons. He's combined both reasons in this text. So what we need to realize is this is not a Bible. It's a Bible study pamphlet that was created for a specific purpose to teach the Ten Commandments. All right, let's skip some of this. Not even manuscripts that are facilitating manuscripts, however, can preserve original material. So, for example, the great Isaiah scroll from Qumran Cave 1, in comparison with the Masoretic text, many of the differences represent linguistic modernizing and updating. Although it does not lay out the text in parallel poetic lines in a precise manner, as we saw in the Masada Psalm scroll, in one place it uses special spaces to show this. So if you look at these red arrows, these spaces are separating the lines into lines of poetry. There are also places where it preserves the original reading and the later Masoretic text does not. So if you look at the Text and Canon Institute website, we wrote 5 articles on Isaiah 53 showing places where the Septuagint or the Dead Sea Scrolls preserved the original reading and the Masoretic text did not. Here is the Psalm scroll from Qumran Cave 11. This scroll is best described as a compilation. It is a selection of biblical psalms arranged with non-biblical hymns and songs probably used as a liturgy in synagogue worship. It is not a Bible. It does not lay out parallel lines in couplets with appropriate spaces. It runs everything together as in prose texts. Yet, Psalm 145, in Psalm 145, it contains a verse that is missing from the later Masoretic text. So, how do we know that a verse is missing from the Masoretic text? Because it's an alphabetic acrostic. Each verse begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And in going from verse 13 to verse 14, it goes from Mem to Samic and skips the letter N. But if we look at, the verse that begins with N is the Lord is faithful in his words and loyal in all his works. This verse is preserved in the Septuagint in the Psalm scroll from Qumran Cave 11, in the Syriac Peshitta, and in one Hebrew manuscript. So even texts that are facilitating texts can preserve readings that are original. Let's see, I want to go to a person like Emmanuel. So Emmanuel Tove, he's a great scholar of the text, but these people are they're comparing the Masoretic text with the Septuagint, with the pre-Samaritan text, and with the Latin Vulgate and the Aramaic Targums. And he says 52% of the manuscripts are non-aligned, 5% represent the parent text of the Septuagint, 5% represent the pre-Samaritan, 27% are equally Masoretic text and Samaritan, 5% are semi-Masoretic, and only 5% are Proto-MT. This is a wrong way to go about things. What we should be seeing is that each one of these sources has been modernized, but the Masoretic text is the one that is least updated and least modernized. It is the most conservative and the least facilitating. So the fact that if we have a situation where the Septuagint agrees with the Samaritan text and the Dead Sea Scroll, it doesn't mean they have an original reading. It could just mean that they're a facilitating text. All right. In conclusion, complementarity. There's a complementarity between conservative copying and facilitating texts. When you have conservative copying, it requires that text be modernized and updated in order to be understood. So if you're going to copy the text exactly like you see it, then you're going to have to do a lot of interpretation for the current audience to understand. If you're going to have to do a lot of explanation if your children are going to understand the text. So conservative copying requires that text be modernized and updated in order to be understood. On the other hand, facilitating texts presuppose a standard text. You can't have a text that has grammatical and lexical and geographical modernization presupposes a standard text. And we actually know by studying the handwriting of the manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls that the same scribe produced both conservative texts and facilitating texts. So these are two different kinds of attempts to be faithful to the Word of God. One way to be faithful to the Word of God is to copy it exactly like you see it. Another way to be faithful to the Word of God is make sure your children can understand the text. All right. Lastly, the evidence of the Targums. The evidence of the Targums. Let me just read what I have here, and then I'll explain it. After the fall of Jerusalem, in the Hebrew textual transmission, there was only repetition and no longer any resignification. This gives the impression that the text was standardized at this time. But in fact, this is an incorrect conclusion. Let me be absolutely clear. The consensus view that the text was standardized in the 1st century AD is wrong. Rather, what was dominant before the fall in terms of repetition was likewise dominant after the fall, the Proto-Masoretic text. Since there was no longer any resignification, it only appears that the text is now standard and not before this time. Two important reasons support this reconstruction. First, it says number 2, but it should be this is number 1. Number 1. First, after the destruction of Jerusalem, Judaism was no longer variegated. So in Jesus' time, there were many different kinds of Jews. There were Pharisees, there were Sadducees, there were Essenes, there were the people at Qumran, there were Zealots, there were all kinds of different viewpoints. But after the fall of Jerusalem, there was only one group, the Pharisees, and these are the precursors of the rabbinic tradition. They're the ones who are they're the source of the rabbinic tradition. Their approach to the text restricted transmission to repetition. So after the fall of Jerusalem, they did not allow Hebrew text to be modernized. Secondly, the Aramaic Targums continued to provide facilitating texts, but they were no longer in Hebrew. So one of the things that happened, by 150 AD, Hebrew was no longer a living language. There were no native speakers of Hebrew after 150 AD. And what they had to do is they had to translate the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic in the synagogue so that the people could understand. So the Aramaic, so the facilitating texts were in Aramaic. They weren't in Hebrew. So they were still interpreting the text. They were still explaining the text. They were still modernizing the text, but they were doing it in Aramaic. They weren't doing it in Hebrew. From the description of the Targum, we can see that they exhibit exactly the same types of resignification that we saw earlier at Qumran. So I didn't spend much time on the Targum, but when you look at the Targums, there's a whole spectrum there from of facilitating and resignification. Analysis of the surviving witnesses then show complementary approaches to copying the text, conservative and facilitating. A conservative approach requires producing facilitating texts, and in turn, facilitating texts presupposes standard. The evidence of the Targums explains why no facilitating texts in Hebrew are found after the fall of Jerusalem. There was a standard text all along. All right, let me show you one. Let me share one more screen here. I want to show this screen right here. So the lecture that I just gave, an early form of it was published in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society. I can send this to you as a PDF. And then a revised edition of the lecture was given at the Text and Canon Institute in February of 2020. That they actually have a video on their website. And then it was published in the Southern Baptist Journal of Theology. But just this week, my student Andrew Case has reproduced the lecture on YouTube. I can do you want me to put this in a chat box, Philip?
Yes, please. Thank
So,
you.
let me see if I know how. I'm not even sure I know how to do that. Where's the chat? Oh, there's the chat box right here. Okay, here. So if I put here, let's see. All right. So I hope that came out in the chat box.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Did the internet work all right? Did it come through all right?
Yes, it is okay now. Okay. Okay, thank you once again for Dr. Gentry for your presentation. And I'm always happy listening and hearing and learning from you all the time. Even though I already got my PhD under you, but still, it is an honor for me to keep studying under you. And I
It's great to
will,
see you. Great to
yeah,
see you, Philip.
thank you. And
And
also I will,
I pray every night for the seminaries in Indonesia. You guys need to know that. I pray every night for the seminaries in Indonesia.
thank you, Dr. Gentry. Yeah. And yeah, we're gonna open for Q&A. Yeah, we have like Q&A. Maybe Mr. Sean Cole, please. Okay.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for your excellent presentation. I have two questions to ask. The first question would be pertaining to the Palestinian system of Nikud. My question is whether they are still in use today. And the second question pertains to your your comment about after 150 AD, there were no native Hebrew speakers. My
That's
question
right.
is then, how did the Masoretes manage to revive what is written in the Masoretic text? How do we know that it is accurate? Thank you.
Well, these are great questions. So my professor, my Hebrew professor was John Revel. John Revel, Revell. Uh, uh, he published books. He published manuscripts that have Palestinian pointing. So uh, basically, what happened is um, the the tradition that was and the Tiberian tradition, the Tiberian tradition became dominant, and the Palestinian tradition fell out of use, and the Babylonian tradition fell out of use. So we have some man we have very so there are very few manuscripts that have Palestinian pointing, and there are only some manuscripts that have the Babylonian pointing, but the, the but we have like actually many. We probably have 20,000 manuscripts from the Middle Ages that are all in the Tiberian tradition. So I hope that answers that part. Uh, I uh, the I would I would say Hebrew was not so Hebrew died as a living language around 150, but it but the but the but the reading tradition but the these Jewish scholars that we call the Masoretes preserved the reading they learn. I mean, many of them their native language would have been Arabic, for example, but they learned Hebrew the way we learn Hebrew, and they accurately handed down the reading tradition from priest to priest and from scribe to scribe. And we know this because, for example, if you compare the Masada Psalm scroll with the Aleppo Codex, it's identical letter for letter. So that's the proof that they transmitted the text accurately over that period of 1,000 years. I
Okay.
hope that's I hope that's satisfactory.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Good
Okay.
question.
Okay. Now we're gonna move to Yonghan. Please, Yonghan, if you have any questions. Yes, Yonghan, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Pak Philip. Thank you, Dr. Peter, for your excellent presentation. Uh, most of your presentation about transmission of text, right? I want to bring it further about the veracity of text. Of course, when we talk about transmission of text, we have to discuss about the veracity of text. Uh,
I
in
don't know
your
what
opinion,
I don't know what you're
okay,
talking about, but go ahead.
okay, in your opinion, after you learn about the transmission of text that is very complex, how
Yes.
do you convince yourself Exodus is something really historical event? Because until today, we don't have a source that confirm that event is really historical, except from Bible. I mean, from archaeologists, there's no proof that Exodus is happening, and there's no historical record among the nation nearby the Egypt that time, or even
Yeah.
Egypt record about Exodus. I mean, like 9/11, either US or the enemy will record that event, although with the different interpretation. But for
Yeah.
Exodus, for example, we don't have that proof. So how do you convince yourself that actually what we are transmit, this one is very really historical? Because for me, myself, when people ask, I cannot answer it by academically, because until a certain point, I just
Yeah.
can answer it just only be accepted by faith.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't believe what you're saying. I think there is evidence. So there is archaeological evidence outside the Bible. So for example, there's an article by Gary Rensburg, okay? Gary Rensburg, R-E-N-D S-B, is it B-E-R-G or B-U-R-G? You can find this. If you email me, Philip, I will send you the article, okay? It's
Okay.
called Israel Without the Bible, and he makes a complete history of Israel from archaeological evidence. So, for example, we actually have if you look at Bryant Wood, what do they have? What do they call that? What do they call his group? I can find the information for you, but there's archaeological evidence for Israel in Egypt. We have the Merneptah Stele, which in 1250 BC shows that Israel is a nation in the land. And we have another example would be that the literary structure of Deuteronomy follows exactly the literary structure of a Hittite treaty from the 14th century BC. It doesn't follow the structure of treaties before that time or the structure of treaties after that time. It doesn't follow the literary form of the Assyrian treaties from the 7th century. So the text can only come from the 14th century BC. So there's actually quite it's called Associates for Biblical Research. Associates for Biblical Research. Bryant Wood. They have lots of articles on their website providing archaeological evidence for the Exodus and for Israel being in Egypt at that time. So I do accept what the Bible says. I do. So, for example, 150 years ago, there was no evidence for Noah's flood. There was no evidence for Noah's flood, and the people in England used to go out and take a walk on Sunday afternoon, and they used to look at fossils, and they believed that the fossils came from Noah's flood. Well, that was before that was before 1850 when the whole world of archaeology opened up, and we now have so much evidence for the Assyrian and Babylonian kings. We have evidence of the Egyptian kings. We have evidence of from the discoveries in Egypt, and so there you should read. There's a book by Kenneth Kitchen on the reliability of the Old Testament. So he deals with all these questions.
Thank you, Dr. Gentry.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Peter. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
good.
we're gonna.
Yeah, I'm sure that I can also. There was a guy who gave a video on academia.edu. I can send you the information. He was talking about all the things in the museum in Istanbul, all the artifacts in the museum in Istanbul that show the reliability of the Bible. And there's even good evidence for the time of Melchizedek. That's before the Exodus.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we're gonna move to Dr. Stephanus Karnadi, please.
Thank you, Dr. Philip and Dr. Gentry. Thank you for the fascinating presentation. I have two questions. First, pardon me if I misunderstand or misremembered what you said. I thought you said that the Samaritan Pentateuch is doing the facilitating the revision or modernizing from the Masoretic text, but how can we be sure that it is a modernization, not coming from entirely different tradition, older tradition than the Masoretic?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, I'm not saying that there aren't places where the Samaritan Pentateuch may have the original reading as opposed to the Masoretic text. I'm not saying that there aren't places, but when we compare the Samaritan Pentateuch with the later Masoretic text, the Masoretic text is normally more archaic, more ancient, more old in terms of its grammar, in terms of the lexical, the lexemes, the vocabulary, the syntax. It doesn't have the harmonizations. It doesn't have the grammatical updating that we see going on in the Samaritan Pentateuch. And I mean, there are books. There are books that deal with that discuss the Samaritan Pentateuch. We can try to get you some information on that.
Thank you. That's a very accurate answer. I think it helps me. And the second question is, like you said, that after the destruction of Jerusalem, the
Yes.
rabbinic are dominated by the Pharisaic branch of Judaism.
Yes.
So we know that they are so against Jesus during the time of Jesus. So could it be
Yes.
that those who transmit or transmit the text have an agenda against Jesus, and could somebody tamper with the text? Would it be
That's a
possible?
very good question. That's a very good question. And so if you go to the website of the Text and Canon Institute, last year we did 5 articles. We did 5 articles on Isaiah 53. And we showed that five places in Isaiah 53 where there was a better reading in the Septuagint or in the Dead Sea Scrolls or one of the other sources than what we have in the Masoretic text. So it is possible. It is possible. It is possible that that there are corruptions from their agenda, as you're calling it. But we don't have to worry because we have so many sources. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls are before the Pharisees. The Septuagint are before the Pharisees. We have the revisions of the Kaiga tradition of Theodotion. These are before. This is before the fall of Jerusalem. We have many sources before that time. So I think we have the possibility of discovering if there are places where they have corrupted the text. And I would say, on the whole, they're very few. Very few. But in any case, we have enough evidence to find those places.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gentry. That
Thank you,
helps.
Dr. Gentry. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Stephanus. And we're going to move to Dr. Nevo Lauli, please, if you have any questions.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gentry. I'm glad to see you again. When I see the speaker is you, it's very glad. I just want to ask about Septuagint. Can you explain to me how the translation techniques employed by the scholars, Jewish scholar, with one or more examples, please? Yeah, where the Septuagint translator is employed, like interpretive strategies and expansion, paraphrase, or harmonization. Yeah, if you can give us one or more examples, so we know how the techniques employed.
Well, thank you for your question. Thank you for your question. I've given lectures on this, and I published it. I published an article on a long time ago, 2004. Let me see if I can find that article here. Just a sec. Just give me a second here. I'll find it for you. Septuagint. Just give me 1 second. All right, now I need to find this. Okay, here it is right here. I'll put it. I will put this. I will put this in the text in the chat box here. So here, can I send this to everybody? I'll send it to
Yes.
everybody.
Yes,
So
thank you.
the Septuagint and the text of the
Yeah.
Old Testament, I can send a PDF to Philip if he needs it, and he can distribute it. But I go through many examples. I go through many examples there of differences between the Septuagint and the Hebrew and the Masoretic text, and how to explain those differences. So it would be another hour lecture if I were to get into this.
Thank you. But the second, can I ask one more? I just want to know how about about the legend letter of Aristeas that
Yes.
makes the 1470 Jews fuller. Can it be true?
So
I just want to.
the letter of Aristeas. You're asking about the letter of Aristeas. So
Yeah, the legend can it be true.
It's legendary. There is a kernel of truth to it. There is a kernel of truth to it, but it's basically you need to realize. I don't know what your background is. So in North America, between 1960 and 2000, we had many new translations of the Bible in English. And Christians had many arguments They had arguments over which translation was the best translation. So some people would say, well, the New American Standard Bible or the New International Version, this is the best translation. And other Christians would say, well, no, the King James Version is the best. And if it's good enough for Paul, it's good enough for us. So there were arguments. There were arguments between Christians over which translation is better. I think so. You remember Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, you have Pentecost, right? And you have
About
you have you have Jewish people coming from all those different countries to worship in Jerusalem, right? And
right,
so
right.
you can imagine what happens at Pentecost. There are people coming from Egypt and they speak Greek in Jerusalem saying, you can't read Hebrew, nya, 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 nya. And they say, our translation was made by 72 scholars and it was blessed by God, nya, 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 you see? So it's, the letter of Aristeas is a pamphlet in a war between Palestinian Jews and diaspora Jews.
Oh,
Do you see what's going on there?
ah, oh,
So obviously there is some truth. There is some truth behind it, but a lot of it is just for the sake of argument and winning the argument. It's not true.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Gentry. Thank
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gentry, and also Dr. Nevo. And we have a question from John Lee Joyhin. I hope you still remember him. He was your student in AGG, Advanced Greek Grammar.
Oh yes, I remember him well. I remember you
Hello,
well.
Dr. Gentry.
Wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you well. Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question, Dr. Gentry. I know you are working in Phoenix Seminary and with Dr. Peter Gurry, and
Yes.
now he's proposing the new coherent-based genealogical method. So can
Yeah.
you give your opinion about this? Because we have, learned with the old
Yeah.
method and now there's a new one. So how we can combine or yeah, just any of your comment. Thank you, Dr. Gentry.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know if I can answer that question because I haven't been working in New Testament textual criticism. I've learned a little bit about the I think Peter Gurry wrote a book in which he argued he tried to show the benefits of the what did he call it? What is it called again? The genealogical, what do they call that
Yes,
approach?
coherent-based genealogical.
Coherence-based, yes, the
Yes.
coherence-based method. I think I think it may bring some improvements, but you still have to start with the basic principles of textual criticism. So I published the text history of the Greek Ecclesiastes. So this book is what I believe about textual criticism of the Greek text.
Okay.
So
Great.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm disappointing you, but I'm not an expert. I don't know enough about enough about it, the coherence-based method. So I still follow the older method, but it's possible that the newer method is actually based on the older method. So I think it'll bring some improvements, but it still has to be based on the older method.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gentry.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. John Lee and
Thank you.
Dr. Gentry. And Juliana, do you have any questions?
So I think I don't know if many of you know this, but I was in the Philippine Islands till I was 6 years old. So I'm very I went to Indonesia in 2017 with Philip, and I ate 33 different kinds of fruit. I loved it. So it was just like being home.
And he likes mango. Okay, Juliana, please go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Gentry, for your presentation. My question is more from a practical side, because knowing that we have so many different Bible versions or translations, how do we know that a version of a Bible is quite accurate and can be used responsibly?
Yes, well, so I think we have one of the problems is that many pastors who are preaching from the Bible, they look at their Bible and there's a footnote at the bottom of the page that says some Hebrew manuscripts read this, or the Septuagint reads this, or the Syriac reads this, and they just for them it's like flipping a coin to find out which or they just go with whatever makes the best sense to them. And that's why I think we're trying, for example, if you look at the Text and Canon Institute, some of their articles, we're trying to write articles that are more understandable to the average person, and help them understand, the process of textual criticism, where we carefully analyze the sources, we analyze the history of the text, we try to understand how copyists made mistakes, and we try to use scientific principles to discover what is most likely as to be the original text. So we have to do that on scientific principles, and not just choose the reading that suits our theology. I don't know if that helps at all, but there are so the United Bible Society published this thing, Preliminary and Interim Report on the Old Testament Text Project. So this was for the average. This was not intended for scholars. It was intended for Bible translators, like people who work with Wycliffe Bible translators. Many of the translators who work with Wycliffe Bible translators don't know Greek. They don't know Hebrew. They're translating from English or French or German into some language in Papua New Guinea or something like that. And so a lot of the textual problems are explained here at a very basic level. I don't know if something like that would help.
Yep, thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Dr. Gentry. And then I have somebody asked me, since you mentioned about critical text, do you know that maybe like Christians and also like the Jews working together on doing critical text, maybe like critical edition of maybe like LXX, maybe like Hexapla or something like that, like Christians and also like Jews, they working together.
Well, let's see. So I'm the director of the Hexapla Institute. We're trying to create a critical edition of the Hexapla produced by Origen. We're interested in we want to know the readings of Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion, these early Jewish revisers. Most of the people working on that project are Christians. The critical edition. This is the critical edition of the Septuagint, and I did the book of Ecclesiastes. So this project started in 1908 and it's still not finished, but we're trying to find all the manuscripts of the Greek Old Testament and create a scholarly edition based on scientific principles. And most of the people involved in that project are Christians. So, I mean, there are, for example, Emmanuel Tobe, he's a Jewish scholar. He's one of the greatest scholars, among the Jewish people in terms of textual criticism. He's written a standard textbook on Old Testament, on textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, but he's not involved in any projects where they're trying to create additions. There is one project from the Hebrew University Bible Project. They're producing scientific editions of the Aleppo Codex, and they've published Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets. So there's only 4 volumes. That's done by Jewish scholars, but there aren't any Christian. I don't know that Christian scholars are involved in that. So,
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gentry. Maybe we're gonna move to last question. Sorry, Bonar, I think we have to prioritize Dr. Gentry Monday. Please.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity as the last person that can ask the question. And thank you so much as well for Dr. Gentry for your wonderful presentation. I actually read your work on Greek Ecclesiastes when I did my PhD research on Kohelet, as well as your works on the Septuagint in Göttingen. So it is an honor for me to meet you despite online meeting.
wonderful.
Well, my question is rather on a very famous psalm amongst the Jews, which is Psalm 145, which is also recited daily. And what is the motive of the disappearance of the nun line in Psalm 145 in Proto-Masoretic and Masoretic text, which is the Ne'eman Adonai b'chol bidbarau v'chassid b'chol ma'asau. And do you think that this disappearance is rather theological or merely scribal error? Thank you.
That's a great question, and it's a while since I've looked at it. I'm going back through my let's see, where did I'm trying to find my slide on that. Okay, the source is missing the verse. So it's not in the Masoretic text, it's not in Origen's Hebrew text, it's not in Theodotion, Aquila, Symmachus, it's not in Jerome's Hebrew text, and it's not in the Targum. So it's only found in the Septuagint, which would be from I would say the Book of Psalms was translated into Greek around 200 BC. It's in 11 QPSA. It's in the Syriac Peshitta. It's in one Hebrew manuscript. So I don't know off the top. I'd have to go back and look at it, and I don't remember. I know I discussed it. So I know I discussed it in my publication, but I don't. I'm 70 years old and I don't remember everything I've written. So I don't remember what I concluded there. I don't remember whether it was a simple scribal error or something theological, but it must have happened fairly early, because some of those sources that don't have it are from the 1st century. I'm sorry, I can't be more help on that one, but it does seem odd. It does seem odd in an alphabetic acrostic to have in the Masoretic text there's only 21 verses instead of 22, and the letter N is missing. So that seems very It just shows that even in a that there that the I would say they're a mistake because the Masoretic text is a very well preserved text, and but there are places where there are problems in the Masoretic text in the copying. So I don't know the reason.
Thank you, Dr. Gentry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gentry, for your presentation. And thank you for answering all of our questions. And we have, yeah, because of our limited time, we're gonna close the sections, and we have a certificate of appreciation to you. And yeah, this is for you, Dr. Gentry. And at least
Thank
you have my signature.
Yeah. Thank you
At
very
least.
much.
Yes.
Well,
Once again,
it's an honor. It's an honor to serve you, and I'm very happy to do it. I would be glad to do it at any opportunity that you give me. So thank you.
yes, we're gonna have this kind of like conference and also seminars in the future. Certainly we're gonna invite you again. Thank you once again, Dr. Gentry.
All right, I'll say good night and good morning to everyone, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gentry. Say hi to your wife and
I
your
will.
grandkids. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.